We have members and guests joining us from across Canada and abroad, such places like Nigeria, Iran, San Francisco, Antigua, Nova Scotia, Alberta, Toronto, and the beautiful British Columbia. Wherever you are, whether it's lunchtime, tea time, supper time, or even later, welcome to What's Up Wednesday. My name is Craig Mackay, your host. Before we move on to the main event, just a few reminders of upcoming events. Next month, November 10th, our guest will be Dr. Richard LeBlanc, discussing how CMC consultants can make the most of being on a board and board governance, how to do it right. Also, in November, please join us for our awards night at the end of the month on the 30th. It's a casual evening of fun, member networking, and most of all, we will celebrate and acknowledge new CMCs and a few fellows into the FCMC fold. Then in December, on the 8th, save the lunch date. For What's Up Wednesday, our guest will be Carrie Lysenko discussing digital marketing. Her insights into using the web for digital marketing are always amazing, insightful, current, and productive. And also right around the corner, we have more member networking with Converge on October 26th. You can register for all these events on the CMC Ontario website. If you're a guest today, consider a full-time membership. There are many benefits. To learn more, visit our website at cmc-ontario.ca or cmccanada.ca and find out how to join and earn your CMC designation. What's Up Wednesday is brought to you by the Institute of Certified Management Consultants of Ontario in cooperation with the Canadian Association of Management Consultants. Please note that today's session will be recorded. Audio and video will be made available on our YouTube channel. The PowerPoint deck will be made available to those registered for today's event. Now, as usual, we will take questions via the chat method. During the presentation, type your questions into the chat. I will sort through them and ask these questions at the end of the presentation. We will have a 15-minute Q&A period. Today, I'm really excited to have our guest speaker here from the Telfer School of Management at the University of Ottawa. Our guest provides a life-changing experience for students in the Executive MBA program. Today's session will discuss topics based on an NSERC, Natural Sciences and Engineering Research Council of Canada, and MyTax-funded research program with case studies spanning private, not-for-profit, and public sector organizations. Our guest is responsible for the U Ottawa's Public Sector Performance Management Research Cluster and the IBM Center for Business Analytics. He continues to research the integration of advanced analytics into management practices in organizations. I would say he's a big data expert and is now integrating that with AI to identify how artificial intelligence can be used to maximize your big data. He's a certified CMC and fellow FCMC. Put your virtual hands together for Professor Dr. Gregory Richards. Welcome.
Thanks a lot, Craig, and welcome everyone. It's a pleasure to see some of you in two-dimensional format. We've been at this for a while in the 2D world. So I'm going to chat about this research project that we're calling Analytics-Based Results Management, or ARM for short. But really the question is, what are implications for consultants? Because I think it's going to have an impact on how managers go about their management processes. Obviously, we consultants engage with managers to help them solve problems. I think the problems will look a little bit different. Now, the research started off really innocently. I was at Cognos Incorporated a number of years ago. We built software that helped organizations manage corporate performance. I worked with a team that was called the Analytic Applications team. Analytic apps are essentially pre-configured data marts that we use to extract data off of the client source system and deliver it through the Cognos Business Intelligence suite of tools. And we were pretty good at that. So my role was really to work with the customers on the one hand and work with the development team on the other hand to make sure we're matching our products to what customers really needed. We had a customer in California by the name of ViewSonic, and the CFO there was very pleased with all the products. And he said something interesting one day, which kind of stimulated the stream of research. He says, look, I get it, right? We had data marts for financial analysis and customer and operations and all that. He said, what I really want to know is, what is the right product mix to help me maximize profit in my organization? And of course, we can answer that question, but what it meant was extracting bits of data from the different data sets that we had, and then crunching through. You can answer that question using a linear programming algorithm, and crunching through that to give him the answer. And invariably what happened is, by the time we gave that answer, the question had moved on because competitors had changed and clients had changed and so on. And so it was a manual process to use data that we had gathered to answer a question for the customer. And then a few years ago, we had a large company in Toronto call us and ask the same question. They said, well, we have a pile of data. We're doing a lot of manual stuff, dumping things into Excel spreadsheets and crunching the numbers there. And wouldn't it be nice if that was automated or semi-automated, right? So that's what kind of triggered the latest round of research, where we're using this analytics-based results management approach. So I'll talk through first the consulting process, that if you're a CMC, you know it fairly well. I'll use a case study to talk about some of the research that we've been doing. Then I'll talk about implications for the consulting process. There are some opportunities that we've noted for consulting as we've gone through. So I'll talk about a few of those opportunities, and then we'll take some questions and have a bit of a discussion at the end. So that's the backdrop to what we've been doing here. So Sandra, if you want to hit the next one. This is our 5-phase consulting process. CMCs know this fairly well. And so on the left side, I've kind of put the data gathering piece. So the entry phase, this is where we work with clients to help really understand what the problem is, right? And sometimes what the client thinks the problem is not really the problem. So we spend a lot of time there. And the bulk of our work is diagnosis and action planning. We're gathering data, analyzing, synthesizing things, and trying to come up with some solutions for our client. On the right side, what I've called value delivery is where we provide recommendations. Now, in a lot of projects, we provide a recommendation, leave it to the client to implement. So we don't actually do a lot of implementation, although that's changing. I think clients are asking more and more for implementation help. And certainly if you're in the IT, the information technology field, you're already doing a lot of implementation. But outside of that, in kind of the broader management consulting sphere, this is sort of what happens. So what I'm going to suggest after I go through the next couple of slides is that what's likely to happen is there'll be a shift. I don't think it'll be completely disrupted, but I think there'll be a shift in emphasis in this process as more organizations start to integrate analytics into how they manage results. So let's go on to the next slide, and I'll tell you a little bit about the research that we've been doing. So here's what we've learned so far. To start this process, we need to clarify the theory of the business. And I'll explain each of these terms in a bit more detail as we go through the slides. And we use that theory of the business to define the data and the analytic models that make sense, right? So interesting point, the company we worked with in Toronto, as I mentioned, they had a lot of data. But as we start to try to apply the analytic models, one of which was a couple of artificial intelligence algorithms, we quickly realized that the data were not in a format that fit with the algorithms we were trying to apply. And we weren't sure at the end of the day it would actually answer the questions that they were asking. And then the third step of this is creating what-if scenarios. Now, what's interesting about this is that it puts the control, so to speak, back in the hands of the managers. And what that allows them to do is ask the question, if I start to adjust certain of the inputs, am I going to get different results? And that's really what we're trying to do when we're using analytics for management processes, is to help managers make decisions, introduce changes, and so on, that gets them better results at the same or lower cost. So in going through this research project, that's what we've learned. We need to do these three things. And once we've done those, we tend to be in pretty good shape. It looks simple on the top. It's not quite so simple. So let's go on and talk a little bit about the theory of the business. This is from Peter Drucker. He wrote an interesting article in, I think it was 1990. And he said, you know, every organization, whether it's a business, a profit-making business or not, has a theory of the business. And what this theory is basically, how am I going to orchestrate resources? So orchestration means, how do I acquire them and allocate them, acquire and deploy? How am I going to orchestrate resources to do the things we need to do to get the results that we care about? And it's a simple concept, but it changes and it varies across different organizations. And I'll talk about that as I get through a few of the slides, and the practical example will make it a bit clearer. So that's the first point. You know, what does a theory of the business actually look like? People get scared by the word theory, but if you think about it, anytime you create a business plan, you're basically generating a series of hypotheses, right? If I build this particular product, customers will buy it. If I organize my team in this way, I'll deliver, you know, good service to Canadians and those types of things. So we're surrounded by hypotheses that could be tested using the data. That was really the foundation for Peter Drucker talking about a theory of the business. Every plan is a hypothesis. We use data to test whether or not the hypothesis is true. So what you see here in this initial picture is, you know, two sets of important questions. The first one is, do I have the right amount of resources to deliver the activities? And are those activities actually leading to the results I care about? All right. So the data that we use spans this particular theory of the business, and we use that to help define the right data and the right analytic models. So let's look at that in a bit more detail here on the next slide. So on the left side, the first blue box there, and all the blue boxes I refer to as the nodes in the theory of the business, and the red arrows, I refer to them as arcs, even though they don't look like arcs, but that's kind of how we talk about them. And so resources, you know, money, people, some cases, it could be equipment and things like that. And so when we open the resource box, we ask ourselves, what kind of data points do we need to help me fully understand the types of resources I have available to me? The activities, that's a difficult one, because in a lot of cases, you know, activities tend to be bundled into processes. And while there's a lot of work on what's called process analytics, it's not a mature area yet. I'll talk about that a little bit more when I talk about the opportunities. But the reality is, if you answer the first question, it says, yeah, it looks like I'm resourced enough to do all these activities that I need to do, but I'm still not reaching the results I care about, then you have to think about how those processes are running and if there are ways that you can clean up those processes a bit. Over the red arrows, you see these things we call association models. And so that is answering the managerial question. These are the right resources for the activities I want to do. So for example, one of the clients I worked with years ago, the question was, and so this is an HR strategy question. The question was, should I be paying below market, at market, or above market? And you can't answer that question without opening the results box and asking, well, what are you trying to accomplish? Because if you want like the most innovative, coolest products in all the world, you probably have to pay above market to get those, you know, highly qualified engineers. If you want regular run of the mill, then you can pay at market or sometimes even below market. So we use the association models to test, you know, whether or not the resources actually can deliver on the activities. and whether or not the activities are leading to the results. There's another benefit to this whole resource activity linkage that often in organizations, as a manager, you get loaded on by your boss to add more things, right? Do more of this, do more of that. The metrics that we create between resources and activities starts to give you a benchmark to tell you if you're going to take on more things, how many more resources do you need? So you can go in the other direction as well, which we found quite interesting. So what's an association model? You would probably think about it as either a correlation or regression models that show the relationship between variables. And so that's exactly what happens. And later on, we're going to talk a bit about AI, artificial intelligence. And the logic is that the guts of AI revolves around this notion of association models. So we use the theory of the business to define and gather the right data. That's the blue boxes, the nodes. And then we think about the right analytic tools, which are typically association models that are above the arcs, the red arrows. Okay, Sandra, let's go to the next one. So this is a case study. Large government organization, what they do is they give out money to research teams, and the results they're trying to accomplish, you can see in the orange circle over there, knowledge used for social, economic, or environmental impacts of Canada. So what does that look like? Well, it looks like if the research team comes up with a new idea that could be turned into a product that could launch a company, or can help an organization innovate, that helps them gain market share, that generates social and economic impacts of Canada. And so if you go all the way to the left side now to resources, you can see in the blue call out there, we've got numbers. And those numbers came from internal to the organization. They weren't that hard to get. In fact, they are published on their website, so they're open to anybody. Anybody can take a look at them. But the challenge was the middle box, because in the middle, the activities are, we use that funding to do research, and we publish and patent things, and we train highly qualified personnel. These are the students who are working on the project. And the organization did not have numbers for those. So the numbers you see there, the publications and the patents, we had to work with Web of Science and the Canadian Intellectual Patent Office, as well as the US Patent Office, to try to link those types of outputs to the projects that were being funded. So the first learning point is this. Most organizations, until they start to surface their theory of the business, they don't really have a whole sense of data discipline around if this is my hypothesis about how I'm going to be successful and deliver the results that we care about, I need to recognize that there are data that's required for me to test and understand whether or not the things I'm doing are truly leading to results I care about. So we're not there yet, because what happens is we build business plans and strategies and all the other cool stuff, but nowhere in there is there an element of a data strategy that's going to help me use data and analytics to manage the business more effectively. So that was the first step, is kind of teasing out this theory of the business. In the public sector world, the theory of the business is usually a logic model. Logic models have been around since the 60s. Some of them become very complicated. And we had to, they started with a logic model, and we took a look at it and had to simplify it to the point where they would kind of say, yeah, that's exactly what we're trying to do. So that's the first step, is how do we clarify that theory of the business? Let's go to the next one there, Sandra. So association modeling, what this slide tries to do is to, so this is an important point, because this extends beyond the analytic modeling issue. What we're trying to do here is, on the left side, we're trying to estimate for the management team, how much of a budget would you want to allocate to a research team if you wanted to get to certain results. In this case, we use publications. And what this is showing is the accuracy of the predictive model. So we're matching up the predictions, the blue lines, with the truth, the red lines. And in most data science projects, what you do is you take your data set, you break it in two. You use half of the data set to train your predictive model, and then you test it on the other half. And so this is the test chart that you see showing the management team the relative accuracy of the model. And what's important about this is when we move to the next stage, where we start to talk about what-if analyses, the management team needs to have faith in the analytic model if they're actually going to make decisions based on the what-if assessments, right? And so there's a very important step that a lot of times they don't really care too much about your R-squared models and all the other fancy statistical things that we have to do. They just want to know how accurate is this particular model, because as a manager, I want to use it for prediction, right? If I lift this lever, something else is going to happen over there. Not too concerned at the end of the day about using regression models to explain things, right? Let's go to the next one, Cedric. So this is a poll for you. Artificial intelligence are thought to be the best association modeling tools that we could find. And the question for you is, well, artificial intelligence algorithms are prediction machines. So true or false, take 30 seconds there to input your answers and we'll see what you all think. Okay, so almost half and half. It's pretty interesting. There's an interesting book written by A.J. Agarwal at the University of Toronto, and the title of his book is Prediction Machines. And so he argues that AI algorithms are essentially prediction machines. And what's happening is the cost of prediction is coming down. And when the cost starts to come down, more people start to use it. He gives the example of driverless vehicles. And what he says is, well, you know, if you understand how the most used algorithm in AI at the moment is gradient descent, which is kind of a series of regression modeling, sophisticated and very complicated, but at the base of it is regression modeling. And he says, well, what it does, it tries to predict what a human driver would do in this situation. Should I stop or go, right? So we are pretty much right in between. So those who said AI prediction machines would be consistent with what A.J. Agarwal has written. And if you want to take a look at his book, it's called Prediction Machines. So you can have a good read of that and think through what he's talking about there. What's happening with AI, and the reason that we didn't end up using AI algorithms in any of the projects, we used an approach called random forest. I'll explain that a little bit more. We use an approach called random forest. The reason we didn't use artificial intelligence, there were two of them. One is it's still more or less a black box. And once you open the black box, it's hard to understand what's going on. Random forest is a little bit easier to explain to a manager. Remember, we have to build trust in the analytic if the manager is going to use it. So the random forest is a little bit easier to explain. And secondly, the amount of data that you need, and you still need labeled data. That means you need an X and a Y in order to train the algorithm. The amount of data that you need is often prohibitive for these types of projects. So other tools tend to become easier for us to use. I'll come back to AI a little bit later on. Okay, we can go to the next one, Sandra. So this is the what-if model. And again, for the case study, the orange letters in the middle, those are the number of publications. And then if you look on the left, it says location 1. You see it's the same location for both charts. And then the numbers are hard to see, but basically the question here was, if I doubled approximately the budget in location 1, would I get more publications? And you can see the charts are telling you you'll get about 2 more. You know, you increase by 120,000 or so, you'll get 2 more publications. Is that a good result? I don't know. You know, the managers in the organization know better than I do whether or not that's a good result, but this stimulates the conversation. You can see it says it's used a random forest simulator. Random forest simulator, it's basically a series of decision trees. And when you look at a decision tree with a manager, you can kind of see their heads nodding, because we can go, well, this is the thing we're trying to predict, and it looks like it's being influenced by this. And you actually have boxes. You can show them how everything connects, and you can see them nodding. And sometimes they'll go, oh, I'm not sure how that worked. But it's an explainable methodology. They can understand it, and they can explain it to their employees and to their managers and things like that. You need your mathematicians around to explain algorithms to folks. So these are the steps we take. We clarify the theory of the business. We look at the types of analytics, and usually we're looking for some kind of an association model. In this case, we use random forest. AI is exciting, and it's a next shiny thing for people, but often there are complications with it because of the size of the data set you need in order to run the algorithms. And often what we do, we'll run a series of them, and we'll pick the one that gives us the best predictive result again. Managers have to be able to rely on it, so you need to give them a sense of how good that predictive model is. Okay, let's move to the next one there, Sandra. So back to the consulting process. I don't know if this is a disruption or a bit of an evolution. I can't say there are a lot of organizations who have completely integrated analytics into their management models yet, but I think it's coming. Agril's argument is that the whole process of prediction machines is getting less expensive and easier to do, and over time, more people will start to adopt it. So I think what's likely to happen, and some of this is already happening, you'll see more emphasis on the right side of this consulting model and a little bit less on the left side. So for example, let's assume we have instrumented the theory of the business to the point where we have a good handle on whether or not it's the activities that we're doing or it's the resources that we have that are leading the problems in us achieving the results. Well, the problem is fairly well scoped at that point, right? It's just a question of, do I manage resources better or do I manage activities better, or some combination of those two. So we don't need to spend a pile of time with that. The data are already gathered. Some of you might recall McKinsey tried an approach called, I think it was called McKinsey Strategies, and they left their software at the customer site to continue to gather data so that when the consultant went in, that whole data gathering diagnosis step was greatly reduced. The strategy there was separate the consultant from the consulting, so to speak, which was interesting. I don't know what actually happened to it, but I know they tried that for a few years. So I think this is what will happen as more organizations start to integrate analytics in how they manage. Our role as consultants will shift even more to the value delivery side and less from that front end where we're spending a lot of time gathering data and crunching it through our Excel spreadsheets and so on. So let's talk about some opportunities, because in going through the research over the last few years, some of these things have popped out, and putting my consulting hat on, I could kind of see where there's some opportunities that will grow. Go to the next slide, Sandra. Just skip that one more. Okay, so this is the first one, and I have another poll for you, so it's interesting to see if you'll come out 50-50 again on this one after this slide. Helping clients define the theory of the business. Now, I don't generally use that terminology when I'm talking to clients, theory of the business, because they don't know what I mean, and they kind of think I'm some guy out of academia. But you see things like this on the screen. You see strategy and business plans and business models and results chains. Some clients are using the balanced scorecard, and they may have adopted the strategy map version of that, which is a little bit of a results chain. In Europe, they talk about goal models and they talk about success models. Same idea. How do I organize resources into what activities to achieve what result? That's sort of how that works. And so part of the conversation is, what's the best model we can use to help us define the specific data points that are needed and the types of analytics that need to be done. So here's your second poll. The strategy is the same as a business model. True or false? The strategy is the same as a business model. All right, false, 92%. Exactly. So it's sort of a question that, the consulting response would be, it depends, right? So when I teach students the consulting model, I always tell them a really good answer as a consultant is it depends. I didn't give you it depends option, so I forced you into true false. Yeah, so two levels of strategy, right? The corporate strategy is sort of what products and services do I deliver to what market? And then the competitive strategy is a little bit more, how do I win in that market? The business model is like an articulation, an elaboration of the theory of the business. Because if you're using the business model canvas, for example, you've got those 9 boxes that you fill in. There's a question of how do all those things relate to each other? And that helps me get into the market and carve some space in the market. So in most cases, quite right, the strategy and the business model are two slightly different things. Two organizations might have the same overall strategy, so same product selling into the same markets, but different business model about how they actually execute on that. So these are some of the conversations that come up with clients when you talk to them about their theory of the business. They ask you questions like, is that my business plan? Is that my strategy? Is that my business model? Like, what is it? And I try to get them to the point where we just ask some very simple questions. What resources do you have? What are you actually doing? What results do you think you need to accomplish? Surprisingly enough, a lot of customer clients, when I chat with them about results, that itself is complicated for them because they have so many different clients that they have to, stakeholders that they have to deliver results to, particularly if you're in a not-for-profit or public service environment, right? Okay, let's go to the next one, Sandra. Somebody asked a question about data validation and so on. So quite right, we had to build this data model to integrate the internal and the external data for the case study I was telling you about earlier. And so what we ended up doing was building a SQL Server database for them using this data model, and then had to get the data from both internal and external, integrated into this database, and then use that to help run the analysis and to do the reporting. So another opportunity here is data integration. This case was a very simple case. We didn't have a lot of data points, but imagine if you're talking about 15 to 20 different data sources that you now have to try to integrate data at different levels of granularity and so on and so forth. It becomes a very complex task. And then the second piece to this is data automation. Go to the next one there, Sandra. So here what we're trying to do is to reduce as much as we can the manual process. So up until this point, everything we did was very manual, right? So there was students who were searching the Web of Science and actually downloading Excel spreadsheets and so on and so forth. So the question was, can we make this a little bit more automated? So on the left side of the screen, we have the sources, right? So those would be the source of the raw data that we're gathering. What you see in the middle is a process whereby when the data in the source is updated, that's the only manual step here. Somebody needs to gather that and send it by email to the monitored folder, and there's a different software tool being used there. And that monitored folder will pick it up and dump it into the database. The SQL database is the one on the right. That's the one we're using as the operational data store, which then makes it available to your visualization tool set. In this case, we're using Microsoft Power BI for the visualization tool set, but you can use any of the ones you see listed on the screen there or others that are not listed. I can't answer a lot of technical details on this particular slide. It's the database guru that's working with us who set this up. But we set it up and tested it, and it does work well. Here's the deal. Most of the situations I've been in, if we have to continue with a heavy manual process all the time, eventually the managers stop using it. I was with one client, and we asked them to see if they could estimate how much it cost them. They were creating scorecards in Excel. I asked them if they could estimate how much it cost them to create those scorecards, and they stopped counting at just over $900,000. So, and that's the time of people who had to run around and gather data and integrate it and all that fun stuff. So the automated or semi-automated process is super important. And this is what the company in Toronto had asked us to do. Is there a way we can automate all of this data movement so that we can spend more time looking at the analysis as opposed to moving data around? Okay, next slide, Sandra. Interpretation is another big one. And again, I use the random forest or the decision tree framework because it's easy for me to work through it with a manager. Some of these charts and graphs that you see are based on regression modeling, and clients need help understanding those. It's not that they're not useful for managers, they are, but they need somebody to guide them through exactly what it means. Not all regression models are created equal. If some of the assumptions don't hold, then your regression model is not that useful. You're probably better off just throwing a dart at the wall. So they need to understand this as we start to move into analytics. Next one, Sandra. Process analytics, this is what I mentioned earlier. This was some work done with a hospital a few years ago. It's small on purpose, right? Because didn't want to show all of what was going on in the hospital. But this is this notion of looking at, yeah, it looks like we have enough resources. Results are not exactly what they want to be. So can we unpack the process and get a better idea of exactly where we're seeing bottlenecks and so on? So process analytics, I think, as we move forward, will become extremely important. Not many organizations have it organized. There was a lot of interest in lean a number of years ago. I think it still goes on in some organizations, but I think in a lot of cases, it's not overly connected to this kind of theory of the business idea. And so that's part of it moving forward, is how do we connect process analytics to this overall results management framework that we've been talking about. Okay, next one, Sandra. All right, so some conclusions here. Big data. Whatever happened to big data? Well, it's funny because I just received an email about a big data conference in Dubai. So people are still talking about it. But you might recall that it was defined, big data was defined as data that were of such high volume, variety, and velocity that we couldn't handle them with current database systems. Well, the truth is we can now handle just about everything in our current database systems. So the conversation is more about how do we use the data we have than worrying about whether it's big or small or medium-sized, right? And there was conversation back then that big data would disrupt consulting. I don't know if we've been disrupted yet. I don't feel that it has. And so then the next thing that happened was artificial intelligence. We're going to replace all these humans with AI algorithms that can make decisions faster and better and so on. That hasn't happened. We're supposed to have driverless cars zipping around the streets now, and that hasn't happened either. So there's a bit of an AI hype, which is sort of translating into reality. There are very good applications for it, there's no question. So point applications, looking at credit risk and things like that. The banks have been using them for years. Although I have to confess, I don't know if it's true AI or if it's business rules, but people talk about AI. Probably things like translation and natural language and things like that. We see a lot of success there. So your Amazon, who's listening to you in your house, they're the little Echo devices and so on. They're using some kind of AI algorithm to help understand and enact your commands. So we see that, but I think that the big pieces, AI will replace the consultants and so on. I don't think that's happening. So last point. ARM is just a simple way of thinking about integrating analytics into a management process. When I first started doing the research with Cognos, that's what struck me, is that we spent a lot of time talking about enabling management decisions, but the truth is a lot of the data was being used by analysts who would then put it into an Excel spreadsheet and then send it to the management team. So it was difficult to get managers to engage with the data. I think this approach where you start with, like, what is your theory of how you're going to meet results? Let's get some simple analytic tools in front of you that you understand. And let's give you some what if scenario modeling capability. So you can make some decisions about the changes that you want to make and test them out before you actually start to make them. I think this is an approach that'll help engage managers more into using analytics for managing results. So that's basically the presentation. I know there were some questions there, so let me zip over and take a look.
Well, thank you, Greg. Really appreciate that, and a bit of a an insight to going back to school, because you have that professorial asking those questions to us and then tricking us on one of them maybe, but everybody passed, so we're happy about that. We have a question from Jose Lemoyne out west. What's a good amount of data to run AI?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's come up a number of times, and it just really depends on the type of question you want to answer. But if you think about a spreadsheet with rows, right? Normally, you're talking about hundreds of thousands of rows. With the project we did in Toronto, we had 7 million rows. Because what happens is there's an interesting story that a 5-year-old child will be able to, once you show him or her a tiger, they will always recognize the tiger. After one exposure to a tiger, they'll always recognize the tiger. An AI tool, you have to show them 5 million tigers for them to actually start to recognize a tiger consistently over time. So typically, if you're using AI, you probably need cases, the number of cases in the hundreds of thousands. And remember that you also need a label of data. You need an X and a Y. In other words, your X might be the experience of your staff that you have, and your Y might be customer satisfaction. You need to have both of those bits of data to be able to train your AI algorithm so it then recognizes the Y in data that it hasn't seen before.
We have another question here that's actually 2 questions, I think, but from Mata, can you touch on data validation and data manipulation?
Yeah, and so the way we did this, well, in all of the projects, what we've done is the managers worked with us. It wasn't a situation where they tossed things over the wall. And so at every step of the way, we're asking them to validate the data that we're gathering. Now the managers wouldn't necessarily want to go through all of the rules of data that we have. And so we would extract things like, here's a central tendency, here's what the variance looks like in your data set. Does this seem right? So data validation is an important point. And our approach to that is make sure that the managers who are going to use this to make important decisions, make sure they're involved in the process as we move on. From a manipulation point of view, from source to what we call the operational data store, so the data store that we integrate in both sets of data, there's always a step of data cleaning and data deduplication and things like that. The tool I showed on that slide, it also does some data cleansing. And so before anything was actually loaded up into that operational data store, we had to go through that process of deduplicating and cleansing all of the data.
Here's a question that sort of comes from my own perspective. I work in the IT business, and some of my programmers will get deep into the philosophy of, is that algorithm leading to actual artificial intelligence? So, I mean, a couple of ways I can put this together. How many algorithms does it take to make AI, or are organizations really using AI or just advanced analytics dressed up as AI? I just thought we could talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, thanks for that, Craig. There's some people talk about greenwashing, and there's AI washing, right? Everybody has AI first policies in their companies. But true AI tends to be automated and adaptive. So in other words, once you set the algorithm and you continue to feed it data, it's going to continue to update itself, and it'll change the threshold for making a decision. So essentially what happens is, let's say you wanted to decide whether or not you need to take an umbrella because it might rain. They'll do some math, and sake of argument, let's say if the number comes out to 50, you should take an umbrella, and if it's below 50, you won't. So the algorithm will update itself and will change that threshold over time based on the data that you're feeding it. So if it's automated and adaptive on its own, then it's true AI. A lot of cases we're using business rules, which is fine. For example, chatbots, a lot of chatbots are business rules. They're not really AI engines. They're programmed by somebody and they have to be updated by somebody in order to adapt to new data. There's a great course that was created by the University of Finland. It's free. Finland thought that everybody over there needed to learn about AI. I think it's called the Elements of AI, if I remember correctly. Sorry, it's University of Helsinki. So if you Google Elements of AI or University of Helsinki, you'll find this little course, and it takes you through all of the conversations about what AI is and what AI is not. Quite useful if you're sort of talking to clients about this.
The other question that I had tied to that a little bit is, I think what has been happening is we've been applying AI in little sort of specific areas where we can run ongoing logic statements that can grow as time goes on. Now, if we take it out of analyzing predictive attitudes and actions with people, and we bring it to the business side, and we look at what's happening in HR, what's happening in sales, what's happening in marketing and production and operations, and then also public opinion tied into that. I think that's where you really start to create that management capability to understand what's going on within your organization as it relates to where its service and products are in the market. Can you just sort of talk a little bit about that? How to, like, the difficulty in as a consultant in helping companies move in that direction?
Yeah, so I mean, we call it Cognos. We had these pools of analytics, right? We had customer analytics, so front-facing. Then we had the operations piece. We weren't able at the time to tie them all together into a framework because obviously they influence each other, right? Product quality is going to influence customer perception and so on. On the HR side, so the resource box, for example, one of the big questions a lot of people like to ask is, what's my turnover going to look like? So who's going to quit? Who's going to stay? Who's going to retire? Who's not? Because if you start to lose resources, and unfortunately in this day and age with the COVID world, that's what we're seeing with a lot of organizations in the hospitality field. They're losing resources like crazy, and it's hard for them to keep up with demand in that case. So the logic of analytics in general, not just the AI piece, because that's the predictive machine, but there are other tools we could use for predictions, right? Like we use random forest, there are Bayesian approaches and so on that could be used quite effectively. But that's exactly what the logic is. Let's see if we could tie them together, right? So, sake of argument, you have your analytics engine running across your entire theory of the business, and you can see that customer perception is starting to go down. You're starting to lose loyalty and so on and so forth. And then you go backwards and you realize that your process analytics is telling you that your process is slowing down and you're not fulfilling things as quickly as you used to in the past. And then you go backwards one more step and you see that, yeah, in fact, you're losing some of your best staff. So now you have an end-to-end engine, and as a manager, you have to make a decision. Where am I going to spend time fixing, right? If I fix at the back end, that's going to improve the middle, which should improve the front end. And you generate a series of hypotheses about this, and you go ahead. Does it have to be AI, like true AI driven? I don't think so. I think at this stage, we can use a whole bunch of different analytic tools to answer those questions. As we move forward, and your data sets become bigger and more complicated, that's where you can start to step into the true AI approaches.
I mean, I think we have to get our clients to start posing business questions that have that what if element to them, and get
Yes.
them thinking outside the box as what questions would you love to have answers to that you don't have answers to, because now there may be ways to actually start getting those answers out of the information that can be culled from so many different areas, as we know, right?
Yep.
You made a comment when we were getting ready for this about big data is not, well, you didn't say, well, not big anymore, but we have hard drives and tools that handle so many billions of records that big data can run in your back pocket.
Yeah, storage is cheap, and we're getting more analytic power available all the time. So I don't think storage is an issue, and only in extreme cases does analytic processing become a problem. Like, with our 7 million rows, we had to use some pretty high-powered computing resources to crunch those numbers. But generally speaking, I think for most businesses, you can get by with what you have on site for sure.
I got a great question here from Kim.
Yep.
Pilkington: using analytics to inform future actions is well established. Do you anticipate any increased client appetite for consultants to use analytics as a tool, as a learning tool of past business decisions to eliminate management preferences or risk propensities? So looking at the past to kind of maybe re-steer the future, or?
Yeah, that's such a great question. One of the things we're looking at right now is there's a tool out there called Leximancer, which is a text analytics tool. And so we're looking at whether or not, if you had, for example, a whole bunch of winning proposals and losing proposals, right, you might be able to parse what was significant about the ones that won versus the ones that lost. And in a lot of situations, we can do the same with management decisions. The problem with most management decisions is nobody ever logs how the decision unfolded, right? If you go and you ask 10 managers, listen, all the decisions you made over the last year, how did you actually come to those decisions? They're going to scratch their heads a bit. I actually had a student do this. She went to a bunch of VPs and organizations, and she asked them a couple of questions. She asked them, what data do you use to make the decisions that you make? And how did you actually come to the decision? And they really had to think hard, before they answered. So, Kim, I think that's something that we can certainly explore. And I know organizations are trying to get a handle on it, but quite right. We learn from past mistakes, and you're 100% correct. Association modeling is a learning tool. I learn the influence of X on Y, and I use that to help me move forward. But I can also look backwards and ask the question, why we did that at that particular point in time, and use that as a powerful learning tool moving forward.
I think we have time for one last question. And this one, talks a little bit about disruption, and you talked a little bit about disruption in the organization, and I do believe that there's opportunities there for change management consultants. But you also, talk a little bit about disruption in the consulting business, whereby our process as consultants could be disrupted because there may be greater emphasis on value delivery that may not be associated with our skills and skill sets. So what are the implications for consulting skill sets? What do consultants need more of or less of?
Yeah, it's a great point, because obviously it's something we wrestle with here at the school, right? What should we be teaching these young people as they go through? Clayton Christensen, the late Clayton Christensen, wrote an interesting article in HBR about the disruption in the consulting field, and he was ahead of his time in thinking through it. So my view on this is we need to become really conversant with anything to do with data. We don't have to become statisticians or data scientists and things like that, but to me, data, they're a resource, just like your financial resources and your people and so on. So that resource box that we have, one of the things that need to be in there is data. And the question is, how are we treating our data? So I think as consultants, we probably need to get conversant with anything to do around what I'm calling data discipline, which is how do we manage and treat data in organizations. Often we throw that over the fence to our friends in information technology. But the truth is, I believe that because data have has become so important for us that it's a managerial responsibility to understand, what data do you have, where are they, and as somebody mentioned earlier, what's the quality of that data that I'm going to use to make key management decisions. So I think that's sort of an area that we need to explore in a lot more detail.
Well, I mean, I alluded to one option there that comes up with respect to change management for consultants. And I think that we can equip ourselves with skill sets that help us understand data analysis, the tools. You listed a few of the tools, with Power BI and Cognos and Tableau. I've also been using QuickSight from Amazon, and there's lots of great tools out there. So, I think that advisors in business are expected to push clients to ask questions, and now we can try to get their answers. Just a couple of reminders here. Thank you, everyone, for participating today and your wonderful questions. Next month, we will have a talk on board governance. This is not a boring topic. There are huge ethical issues when you're on a board, not just as a volunteer, but as a paid board member, even more so. So please join us next month, November 10th, with Richard Leblanc. And on December 8th, digital marketing. What's Up Wednesday, we'll explore digital marketing. This is a fast changing area. There's always something new, and Carrie will surely enlighten us on new develops in digital marketing. I want to send out a special thanks to our events coordinator, Sandra Addison Brock, for running this event and running the Zoom tools, the polls, and everything else. And a huge thank you to you, Professor Greg Richards, for being our guest today. It was some great insights into using AI with big data for analytics-based results management. Until next time, my suggestions are: create diverse what-if scenarios. Help your clients to use their data. Ask your clients what questions they have that they would love to answer, love to have those answers for, right? Become a highly valued consultant who helps them find those answers. Design the AI that is autonomous and adaptable. Space may be the final frontier, but it is now reachable. With that note, everyone, be well, be safe. Get vaccinated if you're not. Have fun. Enjoy Halloween, October. And Sandra, beam me up. Cheers, everyone.